It all started with a sudden flare in the sky, an unfamiliar light brighter than the sun. It seemed harmless at first, a cosmic anomaly or perhaps some kind of space debris. But the truth was far worse. The Vral had arrived. Their ships descended from the stars, massive and silent. They had no interest in diplomacy, no interest in negotiation. The Vral were here to conquer, to strip the Earth of its resources, and to bend humanity to their will. The first strike hit the capital cities. New York, London, Tokyo, Paris, each crumbled in mere hours. The Vral ships unleashed devastating energy pulses that obliterated entire city blocks. They didn't just destroy buildings. They wiped out infrastructure, military installations, and communication hubs with terrifying precision. Humans, unprepared for such an overwhelming force, scattered in panic. The governments, so confident in their military strength, were paralyzed by the sudden assault. The skies filled with the shrill hum of alien weapons, their strikes so precise that whole populations were eradicated before they even realized what was happening. And yet, through the chaos, humanity fought back. Resistance was not immediate, but in the wake of the initial shock, when the death toll soared and Earth's leaders scrambled for answers, something incredible began to emerge, small pockets of resistance. Desperate bands of civilians and soldiers refused to surrender. Though their weapons were primitive compared to the Vral's advanced technology, they had something the aliens had not prepared for: the unyielding will to survive. The first of these defiant attacks were clumsy, sporadic. The human resistance consisted of scattered groups of survivors raiding alien supply convoys, striking under cover of night. These small victories did little to halt the Vral's advance, but they sent a message. Humanity was not ready to be wiped out quietly. As the Vral commanders surveyed the aftermath of their initial strikes, they laughed. The humans, they thought, were a broken species. Their armies had crumbled. Their leaders were dead or captured. There were no real threats left. They believed the war was already won. Their calculations were simple. Earth was too small, too disorganized, too weak to mount any serious challenge. The humans would eventually surrender or perish. It was just a matter of time. But the Vral had no way of knowing what they were dealing with. They saw humans as primitive, a species that could be easily crushed underfoot. What they didn't understand was that human spirit could never be crushed that easily. The more the Vral advanced, the more they failed to realize one critical truth: humanity had survived worse. In the streets of the fallen cities, survivors hid in the shadows, nursing their wounds, tending to the injured, and learning from their mistakes. They may have been battered and outnumbered, but they were not broken. Every strike, every defeat, only strengthened their resolve. And so, in the heart of the chaos, something began to shift. Humans weren't running anymore. They weren't waiting to be saved. The time had come to show the invaders exactly who they were dealing with. The resistance was small, but it was growing. They would show the Vral that humanity had something they didn't: hope. This continuation sets the stage for humanity's unexpected resilience against the overwhelming Vral forces, highlighting the defiance of the survivors. It sets up the transition into the next part, where humanity begins to rise against the invaders, despite their dire circumstances. While Earth seemed to be collapsing under the weight of the Vral invasion, something incredible was happening in the shadows. The Vral had assumed that once humanity was broken, the war would be over. But they didn't understand the resilience that coursed through the veins of every human left standing. In small, hidden places across the world, the resistance began to awaken. It wasn't just the military that fought back. It was ordinary people: teachers, doctors, farmers, and engineers, all doing what they could, coming together with a single shared goal: survival. They had been forced into hiding, but they refused to stay hidden forever. In the wake of their initial shock, humanity began to regroup. At first, their attacks were simple and uncoordinated. A bomb here, a sabotage there. A group of survivors would ambush a Vral convoy, disabling it and vanishing into the night before the aliens could retaliate. These were not victories that would end the war, but they were something. A sign of life, a sign of defiance. The Vral, however, remained dismissive. Their forces were still overwhelming, and they believed these attacks were nothing more than annoyances, easily dealt with. To them, these acts of resistance were just the desperate flailing of a dying species. They couldn't have been more wrong. The turning point came when a former military strategist, a man named Lucas Bellamy, emerged as an unlikely leader. Bellamy had been a high-ranking officer before the invasion, and when the war began, he lost everything: his family, his comrades, and his country. But the one thing he hadn't lost was his mind. His experience in battle and his ability to think strategically became the catalyst for organizing the scattered human cells. Lucas didn't see the battle as one of mere survival. He saw it as a chance to fight back with purpose. Under his leadership, humanity's resistance began to shift from disjointed attacks to well-coordinated strikes. The humans started to learn. They studied Vral tactics, their technology, and their weaknesses. They didn't have superior firepower, but they did have ingenuity. And in war, ingenuity often proved more powerful than raw strength. The first major success came when a group of resistance fighters, using stolen Vral technology, managed to take down one of the alien supply ships. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it had a profound impact. For the first time, the Vral realized their technology wasn't infallible. They had made the mistake of assuming that humans wouldn't be able to reverse engineer their technology. Now that arrogance was coming back to haunt them. The news spread quickly. Humans weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. As the days turned into weeks, the resistance began to grow bolder. Small cells merged into larger, more organized units. They started hitting Vral command centers, disrupting communication lines, and stealing valuable information. It was guerrilla warfare at its finest, but with a new twist. The humans were using the Vral's own technology against them. The aliens had underestimated the adaptability of humanity, and now that mistake was proving costly. The more the Vral encountered these unforeseen attacks, the more they began to realize the error in their thinking. Humanity wasn't crumbling. They weren't begging for mercy. Instead, they were regrouping, learning, and evolving. Every setback only seemed to push them harder. The Vral's confidence began to falter. What had seemed like a certain victory was now anything but. The more the humans fought, the clearer it became. This war was far from over. And the Vral were about to learn that the most dangerous enemy they would face wasn't their advanced technology, but the unyielding spirit of the humans who refused to back down. The Vral were relentless. After the humans' initial resistance, they hit back with overwhelming force. Entire cities were wiped off the map in brutal retaliatory strikes. From the moment the resistance started to show signs of life, the Vral were determined to crush it, to make an example of every act of defiance. In the dead of night, large swaths of humanity's survivors found themselves in the midst of airstrikes and bombardments. Military bases that once stood as symbols of resistance were reduced to rubble. The fighting was fierce, and casualties mounted with every passing day. The hope that had started to ignite in the hearts of the human fighters was slowly being smothered by the alien juggernaut. Yet, even in the wake of these tragic losses, something remarkable occurred. The humans did not break. The initial fear and doubt that had gripped them after the invasion were slowly replaced by something more dangerous: resolve. They had lost battles, cities, and families, but they refused to lose the war. Lucas Bellamy knew that in times like these, victory was not about numbers, firepower, or the battlefield. It was about staying one step ahead. So, while the rest of the world was crumbling, he and a handful of other resistance leaders began to strategize. They could not take on the Vral head-on, but they could outsmart them. They could take advantage of their enemies' arrogance and overconfidence. It was during this dark time that Bellamy and his team developed a new strategy. They would hit the Vral where it hurt the most: their supply lines, The alien invaders relied heavily on their advanced technology, but they also depended on a steady flow of resources to fuel their war machine. If they could disrupt those resources, they might just cripple the Vral forces without needing to engage in direct combat. The first attempt was risky. A small group of resistance fighters infiltrated a Vral supply depot, using makeshift explosives and whatever they could scavenge from previous battles. They struck in the dead of night, causing enough damage to delay the Vral's next wave of attacks. It wasn't a large victory, but it was a start. They had taken something from the Vral, something precious, and it gave the humans a taste of what was possible. But the Vral didn't take kindly to these setbacks. They retaliated with vengeance, sweeping across the globe with renewed aggression. Entire populations were enslaved, forced to work in Vral-controlled factories or serve as cannon fodder in their war. The humans had tasted defiance, but it came at a cost. The alien oppressors began to methodically hunt down the leaders of the resistance, eliminating those who showed even a flicker of rebellion. Despite the heavy losses, something unexpected happened. In the midst of despair, new leaders emerged from the wreckage. A mechanic in New York City, a doctor in Paris, and a former teacher in Mumbai all took up the mantle of resistance, organizing cells and rallying the survivors. They fought not just for survival, but for something more, for their families, for their homes, and for the idea that humanity could stand on its own feet again. In every small victory, the Vral were learning a painful truth. The more they tried to crush humanity's spirit, the stronger it became. The resistance wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future. The cost was high, and every loss cut deep, but the fire that burned in their hearts only grew hotter. The Vral had no idea how deeply they had underestimated the one thing they could never conquer, the will of the human race. The Vral may have had the upper hand in terms of firepower, but they underestimated humanity's creativity. Each defeat, each brutal strike from the invaders, pushed the human resistance to adapt and innovate. It was no longer just about surviving the war. It was about turning the tide. Lucas Bellamy, along with his growing team of engineers and former military strategists, understood one simple truth. The humans had to become the Vral's worst nightmare. They couldn't match the aliens' technology in raw power, but they could use their enemies' arrogance and overconfidence against them. And that's exactly what they did. The first major breakthrough came when a team of resistance engineers managed to repurpose a downed Vral ship. The ship's technology was far beyond anything humans had ever seen, but they didn't need to understand all of it. They only needed to understand enough to turn it into a weapon of their own. For weeks, they labored in secret, poring over the alien craft, reverse engineering the technology. It was difficult work, but when they finally succeeded, it changed everything. They had created a new kind of weapon, a hybrid of human ingenuity and alien power. The first successful test was nothing short of breathtaking. The resistance launched a surprise attack on a Vral communication hub, using the newly adapted weapon to disable the alien defenses. The attack was swift, precise, and devastating. The Vral, expecting the humans to be weak and disorganized, were caught off guard. News of this victory spread quickly through the human ranks. The morale boost was immense. For the first time since the invasion began, the resistance saw that they had the power to strike back in ways they never imagined. The Vral might have the numbers, but humanity had a unique advantage: the ability to learn, adapt, and innovate under pressure. In the months that followed, the resistance expanded their efforts. They took the lessons learned from the repurposed alien technology and began applying them to every aspect of the war. Vral weapons were hacked, their communication systems were infiltrated, and their fleets were sabotaged. The humans began to strike at the heart of the Vral war machine. Every small victory led to larger successes. Slowly but surely, the tide of the war began to shift. While the Vral had advanced technology, they had never faced an enemy quite like humanity. The aliens relied heavily on their technological superiority, assuming it was enough to ensure their dominance. What they didn't account for was humanity's ability to adapt, to take the tools of their enemies and turn them into something entirely new. The Vrall had underestimated the resourcefulness of a species fighting for its survival. The resistance wasn't just focused on weapons and sabotage anymore. They understood that to defeat the Vrall, they needed to cripple their entire war effort. Key Vrall supply lines were disrupted, alien fuel depots destroyed, and their reinforcements delayed. It wasn't just about fighting battles anymore. It was about undermining the entire infrastructure of the invasion. The Vrall commanders began to feel the pressure. Their ships were less able to maintain their positions, and their forces on the ground were spread thin. What had once been a flawless invasion was starting to show cracks. The humans, who had once been scattered and disorganized, were now a serious threat. Lucas Bellamy knew the Vrall would be quick to react. They wouldn't tolerate setbacks for long. But this, he understood, was their greatest strength. Humanity's ability to keep pushing forward, no matter how many times they were knocked down. The Vrall could crush armies, destroy cities, and even eliminate leaders, but they couldn't crush the human will to survive. In the end, the resistance didn't need to match the Vrall in strength. They only needed to outsmart them, outlast them, and remind them of one crucial truth. For humans, defeat was just a minor setback. As the resistance grew stronger, the Vrall commanders began to feel something they had never expected: fear. The humans, who they once thought to be insignificant and easy to conquer, were becoming a real problem. The unexpected success of the resistance and their growing ability to adapt had left the invaders scrambling. They were no longer dealing with a fractured, weak species. They were facing a relentless, innovative enemy determined to reclaim its planet. The first signs of panic came when the Vrall's flagship, the Vrethok, encountered a sudden and coordinated strike by a group of human fighter pilots using stolen Vrall technology. The aliens were used to battling with overwhelming numbers. But this time, the humans struck fast and precisely, disabling their communication systems and causing massive damage to the Vrethok. Though the Vrall managed to retreat, the psychological damage was already done. It was a blow to their confidence that they couldn't easily ignore. The Vrall's initial response was to increase their assaults, but they found themselves increasingly on the defensive. Every step forward came at a higher cost. The humans had learned to exploit the weaknesses in Vrall technology, especially their reliance on intricate supply chains and the lack of proper countermeasures for unconventional tactics. No longer content to simply fight, the resistance had become experts in guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and psychological operations. The tide of battle began to shift. In major cities, pockets of resistance started winning ground. Strategic locations that had once been completely under Vrall control were now being recaptured, one by one. Humanity, once thought to be no more than a nuisance, was proving to be a force that couldn't be ignored. The Vrall leadership was in disarray. High-ranking officers who once prided themselves on their tactics began to question their strategy. A few began to argue that the invasion of Earth had been a mistake, that they had misjudged the humans' capacity for resistance. It was a rare thing to see, alien commanders who questioned their own success, for the Vrall had never before encountered a species that could adapt so quickly to adversity. On the ground, the Vrall took to drastic measures. They began rounding up civilians in larger numbers, using them as human shields or forcing them to work in alien-controlled factories. But this only added fuel to the fire of the resistance. The humans were no longer fighting for their survival. They were fighting for their freedom, for their homes, and for the families they had lost. The thought of becoming slaves to the Vrall pushed many to fight even harder. Meanwhile, Lucas Bellamy and his team continued to press forward. Their attacks grew bolder, more daring. They learned to strike with precision, never overstaying their welcome. They sabotaged Vrall weapons depots, stole alien ships, and even took down a few Vrall commanders. These victories, though small in the grand scheme of the war, sent shockwaves through the Vrall military command. The humans were not only capable of withstanding their attacks, they were turning their tactics against them. At the same time, Bellamy knew that to defeat the Vral once and for all, they would need more than just sporadic victories. They needed a decisive blow, something that would shake the Vral to their core and force them to confront the truth. Humanity would never stop fighting. The Vral had always been confident in their superior technology, but now they were faced with a species that refused to bend. The humans had shown them that no matter how many times they were pushed to the brink, they would always find a way to fight back. The Vral's confidence was faltering, and the humans were beginning to see the first signs of victory. The war was far from over, but it was becoming increasingly clear that the Vral had underestimated humanity in ways they could never have imagined. The war had reached a critical point. After months of resistance, small victories, and stolen technologies, humanity had proven something undeniable. They weren't going to simply fade into history. They were going to fight for their planet until the very end. And now, the Vral were beginning to understand just how costly their underestimation had been. Lucas Bellamy and his team knew that the time for guerrilla tactics was drawing to a close. They had fought tooth and nail for every inch of territory. But if they wanted to truly defeat the Vral, they needed to think bigger. They needed a decisive blow, something that would cripple the heart of the Vral invasion. That blow came in the form of a daring, high-risk mission, a plan so audacious it could either break the back of the Vral forces or lead to total annihilation. The plan, codenamed Operation Rebirth, involved infiltrating a Vral command ship, the Tarkar, which was the linchpin of their entire invasion force. This vessel controlled communications, coordinated attacks, and housed the highest-ranking officers in the Vral fleet. If they could take it out, it would send shockwaves through the enemy, disrupting their entire command structure. It was humanity's boldest move yet. Bellamy and his team worked tirelessly, preparing for every possible contingency. They knew the stakes. If the mission failed, it would likely mean the end of the human resistance. But if it succeeded, the Vral's leadership would crumble, leaving their forces disorganized and vulnerable. The infiltration was set for the dead of night, under the cover of a massive storm that would make it difficult for the Vral to detect human movement. The resistance fighters, now well-trained and well-armed, launched a multi-pronged attack on key Vral positions. Distractions were created, false signals sent, and sabotage executed, all to draw attention away from the main objective. As the team approached the Tarkar, they faced more obstacles than they had ever imagined. The Vral had reinforced their ships with advanced security systems, making it nearly impossible for anyone to breach them undetected. But Bellamy's team had learned to adapt. They used everything from hacked Vral communication devices to stolen cloaking technology to hid closer without being spotted. It took hours, but they finally made it inside the heart of the Tarkar. The ship's corridors were eerily quiet, the calm before the storm. Bellamy knew the clock was ticking. They had to move quickly. Every minute they spent inside was a risk. The Vral were bound to realize they were under attack soon. But the humans were determined. They planted explosives in critical systems, targeting the ship's control room and power core. As they placed the final charges, the alarms finally blared. The Vral were aware of the breach, and they weren't going down without a fight. But it was too late. The resistance had already planted the seed of destruction. Bellamy ordered the team to retreat, and they fought their way back through the ship, using every ounce of skill and cunning they had. The explosion rocked the Tarkar to its core. A series of massive detonations sent shockwaves through the Vral fleet. The Tarkar was destroyed, and with it, the centralized command structure that had been the backbone of the Vral invasion. Without leadership and coordination, the Vral forces began to falter. The humans had struck at the heart of the enemy's power, and now the invaders were scattered and disoriented. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. The resistance had achieved the impossible. The Vral were in disarray, and for the first time since the invasion began, it was clear that the tide of the war had turned. But Bellamy knew this was just the beginning. The Vral still had strength, and they would retaliate. However, now that the human resistance had struck a decisive blow, there was no turning back. Humanity had sent a clear message. They would never give up. And this war was far from over. The destruction of the Karkar was a defining moment, but the victory didn't bring an immediate end to the war. In fact, the days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. The Vral, though disorganized, were not a species that would accept defeat easily. The explosion of their flagship had caused a temporary breakdown in their leadership, but it had also triggered a fierce retaliation. The aliens unleashed a wave of destruction, targeting key human settlements and military outposts in an attempt to reassert their dominance. The human resistance, however, was no longer the fragmented group it had once been. With the Karkar's fall, the unity within the resistance had strengthened. Nations that had once fought against each other were now working side by side to defend their shared planet. The realization that they were all in this together had ignited a renewed sense of purpose and determination among the human forces. Bellamy and his commanders understood that the Vral's retaliatory strikes were not just meant to punish. They were meant to break the human spirit. The aliens knew the humans were capable of great acts of defiance, and if they could destroy the human will to fight, the war could be won. This was the Vral's last, desperate attempt to crush humanity. But what the Vral didn't understand was that they had already lost. The destruction of the Karkar had not only weakened their ability to coordinate, it had shown the entire human race something extraordinary. They could win. For the first time in the war, there was a clear path forward. The humans had taken the fight to the heart of the Vral, and the aliens had faltered. This was no longer a war of survival. It was a war of liberation. The tide began to shift in unexpected ways. As the Vral concentrated their forces on attacking Earth's remaining strongholds, the human resistance pushed back with everything they had. Every victory, no matter how small, seemed to ignite new waves of resistance. Humans in cities that had once been under alien control began to rise up. Former prisoners turned fighters, civilians turned soldiers, all rallying together. Bellamy, now a symbol of humanity's unbreakable spirit, saw the resurgence of hope in places where it had once seemed impossible. Entire resistance networks sprung up across the globe, each one more organized than the last. Vral warships, once thought to be indestructible, were now being taken down by coordinated human efforts, often with the help of hack technology or traps, designed to exploit the weaknesses the resistance had learned to identify. Despite this growing strength, the Vral had not yet been fully defeated. They still held many strongholds, and their alien weaponry was far more advanced than humanity's. The human success came not from technological superiority, but from their resolve. They had taken the fight to the Vral in ways the aliens could never have predicted. As the resistance pushed forward, Bellamy and his commanders began planning the final phase of their counteroffensive. They knew that victory would require a final, overwhelming strike that would force the Vral to surrender. But this time, they would not be alone. The human race, once scattered and broken, had become a unified force. The last pockets of Vral resistance on Earth were about to face something they hadn't anticipated: a full-scale, coordinated offensive from every corner of the world. The Vral had believed they were the superior species, that humanity was nothing more than a stepping stone in their campaign to conquer the galaxy. They had underestimated the strength of the human will. The war was far from over, but the Vral were beginning to realize something they could no longer ignore. Humanity's refusal to yield had become their greatest weapon. The final stage of the war had arrived. The Vral, once so confident in their dominance, now found themselves pushed to the brink. The human resistance, stronger and more unified than ever, had built a force capable of striking at the very heart of the alien invaders. The tides had shifted, and the Vral, who had once believed the humans to be an insignificant species, were now on the defensive. Bellamy stood with his commanders in a small, dimly lit room, looking over the plans for the final offensive. This was it, the culmination of everything they had fought for. It was no longer about survival. It was about taking back their planet, about restoring the future of humanity. The Vral had taken everything from them, but they had underestimated one thing: the depth of humanity's resolve. The plan was simple in theory, but incredibly risky. The humans would launch a full-scale assault on the Vral's remaining stronghold on Earth, a fortress-like city that had been heavily fortified. It was their last remaining hold on the planet, and if the humans could destroy it, the Vral would have no choice but to retreat. This final battle would determine everything. As Bellamy and his team prepared for the assault, word came in from other resistance cells around the world. The combined forces of the global resistance had joined together, each faction contributing its resources and fighters. There were no more divisions, no more isolated pockets of resistance. The world had finally united in the face of a common enemy. The attack began with a series of synchronized strikes. Human forces launched from every direction, overwhelming the Vral defenses. They used everything they had learned: disguised movements, hacked alien weapons, and guerrilla tactics to outsmart and outfight the Vral. It was a battle unlike any the aliens had faced, a relentless barrage of human ingenuity and sheer willpower. But the Vral didn't go down without a fight. They retaliated with everything they had left: advanced weaponry, terrifying war machines, and devastating airstrikes. The battle became a chaotic mix of explosions, gunfire, and the unmistakable sound of Vral warships overhead. The humans pushed forward, refusing to be intimidated, despite the overwhelming odds. In the heart of the battle, Bellamy led the charge. With every step, he saw the faces of his comrades: soldiers, engineers, doctors, civilians, people who had once feared they would never see a future, now fighting for one. They fought not just for survival, but for their families, their homes, and the right to live in peace. Bellamy's team finally reached the core of the Vral stronghold, the heavily protected command center where the alien leadership was hiding. It was a race against time. The humans had one chance to destroy the heart of the Vral's operation, and they couldn't afford to fail. In a final desperate act of defiance, the resistance fighters breached the command center. Inside, the Vral leaders scrambled to organize a counterattack, but it was too late. Bellamy's team planted the charges that would cripple the entire Vral infrastructure. The countdown began. With the charges set, Bellamy and his team made their escape, fighting off Vral soldiers who were desperate to prevent the destruction. The clock was ticking, and every moment counted. As they raced toward the exit, Bellamy couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. This was the end of the Vral's reign, the culmination of everything humanity had sacrificed. The explosion that followed was deafening. The Vral command center erupted in a fiery explosion, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The shockwave tore through the Vral defenses, crippling their communication and coordination. The invaders, without leadership and without control, began to falter. The humans had done it. They had taken back their world. The war was not over in an instant, but the Vral no longer had the strength to continue their invasion. The remaining alien forces surrendered or fled, leaving Earth to the humans they had so long underestimated. Bellamy, bloodied but victorious, looked out over the battlefield. The humans had faced the impossible and emerged triumphant. For the first time in years, Earth was free, and the humans, who had once been the prey, had become the predators. They had shown the galaxy that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and nothing could break their spirit.